holding hands in crowded restaurants, and a quiet, unspoken pressure that if you weren't loved by someone else, you were somehow missing something essential. But something has shifted deeply, globally, spiritually. You can feel it in the air, in conversations, in the way people are choosing to live, heal and connect. Valentine's Day is no longer just about romantic love. It has become a mirror reflecting a much deeper human awakening. This is the era of self-love and spiritual love, and it is not just a trend, it is a transformation. More and more people are realizing that love was never meant to be something we chase outside ourselves first. Love is something we cultivate, embody, and once that inner love is awakened, every relationship, romantic, platonic, and even divine, begins to transform naturally. This is why millions of people are now celebrating Valentine's Day alone, but not lonely. They are buying flowers for themselves, writing letters to their younger selves, healing old wounds, setting boundaries, meditating, praying, journaling, forgiving, and reconnecting with their soul's truth. Because for the first time, many are understanding something powerful. The longest relationship you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. If that relationship is broken, neglected, or filled with self-judgment, no external love can ever fully fill the emptiness. But when you learn to love yourself, not in a selfish or ego-driven way, but in a compassionate, accepting, deeply spiritual way, everything changes. You stop begging for attention and start attracting genuine connection. You stop tolerating what drains you and start choosing what nourishes you. You stop fearing loneliness and start valuing solitude as sacred space. And this is where spiritual love enters the picture. Because self-love, when it deepens enough, naturally becomes spiritual. It moves beyond surface-level self-care and becomes soul awareness. It becomes the realization that you are not just a person trying to survive life. You are a consciousness experiencing growth, learning lessons. Spiritual love is not possessive. It is not transactional. It does not ask, "What can I get?" It asks, "What can I become?" It is the love that recognizes divinity within yourself and others. The love that understands healing is sacred work. The love that sees growth as devotion. And that is why this new Valentine's energy feels different. It is quieter, deeper, more intentional. People are celebrating friendships that held during their darkest nights. They are honoring personal breakthroughs that took years of courage. They are appreciating moments of peace that once felt impossible. They are choosing authenticity over performance, presence over perfection, and meaning over tradition. Even the idea of romance itself is evolving. Instead of searching for someone to complete them, people are seeking partners who reflect their wholeness. Instead of chasing intensity, they are choosing alignment. Instead of confusing attachment with love, they are recognizing that real love feels safe, expansive, and free. This shift is not random. It is the result of collective exhaustion from shallow connections, emotional burnout, and years of living disconnected from our inner world. People are tired of pretending, tired of proving, tired of shrinking to be accepted, so they are returning to themselves. And when you return to yourself, you inevitably encounter your spirit, the quiet, steady presence within you that has always known your worth, even when you forgot it. This is why healing has become a central part of modern love. You cannot truly love others deeply if you are constantly abandoning yourself. You cannot experience spiritual connection while suppressing your own truth, and you cannot celebrate love authentically while ignoring your own emotional wounds. So people are doing the inner work. They are facing past pain, releasing old patterns, breaking generational cycles, and learning to sit with their emotions instead of running from them. And yes, this process is uncomfortable. Growth always is. But it is also incredibly liberating, because every layer of healing brings you closer to unconditional love, the kind that does not depend on circumstances, validation, or approval, the kind that simply exists because you exist. Another beautiful part of this new Valentine's era is the expansion of love beyond romance. Friendship is being honored as sacred connection. Community is being recognized as emotional nourishment. Even the relationship between humans and nature is being experienced as love. People spending time in silence with the earth, feeling grounded, supported, connected to something larger than themselves. Love is no longer a single lane, it is an entire universe of connection. And perhaps the most powerful realization of all is this: You do not have to wait to be loved to experience love. You can generate it. You can embody it. You can become it. When you treat yourself with kindness, you are expressing love. When you forgive someone who hurt you, you are expressing love. When you choose growth over comfort, you are expressing love. When you sit in stillness and feel gratitude for simply being alive, you are experiencing spiritual love in its purest form. This shift is changing how people see Valentine's Day entirely. It is no longer a test of desirability. It is a celebration of consciousness. A reminder to reconnect with the heart, not just emotionally but spiritually. A day to ask yourself not who loves me, but how deeply am I living in love? And when you ask that question honestly, everything becomes sacred. Your healing becomes sacred, your boundaries become sacred, your peace becomes sacred, your joy becomes sacred. Even your solitude becomes sacred, because solitude is where you hear your soul most clearly. And maybe that is why so many people are finally feeling at peace with being alone, because they are not actually alone anymore. They are in relationship with themselves, with life, with spirit. They are discovering that love is not something that visits occasionally. It is something that can flow continuously when you remove the barriers within you. Fear, shame, comparison, resentment, these are the walls that block love's natural movement. And once those walls begin to fall, love stops feeling rare and starts feeling abundant. This is the real revolution happening right now. Not louder celebrations, but deeper awareness. Not more displays of affection, but more authenticity of feeling. Not chasing love, but becoming aligned with it. So if this Valentine's Day feels different to you, if you feel less interested in external validation and more drawn toward inner peace, if you find yourself craving meaning instead of attention, if you feel the desire to heal, grow, and connect with something deeper than romance, you are not strange, you are not behind. You are part of a collective awakening that is redefining love itself. Love is no longer just an emotion we experience occasionally. It is a state of being we cultivate intentionally. And once you understand this, Valentine's Day stops being a single date on the calendar. It becomes a reflection of how you live every day. How you speak to yourself, how you treat others, how you honor your spirit. Because real love, self-love, spiritual love, soul-level love is not seasonal, it is eternal. And the more people awaken to this truth, the more the world itself begins to change, not through grand gestures, but through millions of quiet personal transformations happening in hearts everywhere. This is the biggest trend, but it is more than a trend. It is humanity remembering what love was always meant to be. What makes this shift even more powerful is that it is not being taught in classrooms, not being forced by traditions, and not being commanded by any single voice. It is emerging quietly from within people's lived experiences. It is being born in moments of heartbreak that forced someone to finally look inward, in sleepless nights where a person realized they had been giving everything to others while abandoning themselves, in silent walks where someone suddenly felt the presence of something greater than their worries. This awakening towards self-love and spiritual love is happening because life itself is guiding people there. When external systems fail to provide fulfillment, the soul begins searching for something deeper, and many are discovering that the love they spent years chasing was never missing. It was simply buried under conditioning, fear, and misunderstanding. For generations, people were taught that love must be earned, proven, sacrificed for, or suffered through. They were told love required losing parts of themselves to keep someone else. They learned to equate intensity with devotion, attachment with loyalty, and emotional dependency with connection. But now people are questioning these patterns. They are noticing how often what they called love was actually anxiety, how often what they called passion was actually fear of abandonment, how often what they called commitment was actually self-neglect. And this awareness is not making people cynical, it is making them conscious. Because once you see clearly, you cannot unsee. Once you recognize that love should expand you rather than shrink you, you begin choosing differently. You begin protecting your energy. You begin listening to your intuition. You begin honoring what feels aligned rather than what feels familiar. And that is when love becomes spiritual, when it stops being driven by unconscious patterns and starts being guided by inner wisdom. Spiritual love is deeply rooted in awareness. It asks you to be present with yourself in ways that can feel uncomfortable at first. It invites you to witness your thoughts without judgment, to sit with emotions without escaping, to observe your patterns without denying them. And in that honest observation, transformation begins. Because true self-love is not pretending everything inside you is perfect. It is holding compassion for the parts of you that are still healing. It is embracing the messy, unfinished, evolving nature of being human while recognizing the sacredness of your existence at the same time. This balance, human and divine, flawed and whole, growing and complete, is the heart of spiritual love. And as more people experience this balance within themselves, their relationships begin to change in remarkable ways. They communicate more honestly because they are no longer afraid of rejection defining their worth. They set boundaries not as walls, but as acts of respect, both for themselves and for others. They choose connection that feels peaceful rather than dramatic, supportive rather than consuming. And perhaps most importantly, they stop expecting others to heal wounds they must face themselves. This is one of the greatest signs of emotional and spiritual maturity, the understanding that love can support your healing, but it cannot replace your responsibility to grow. When two people who understand this come together, their connection feels different. There is less pressure to perform, less fear of loss, less need for control. Instead, there is space for individuality, space for growth, space for truth. Their love does not feel like possession, it feels like partnership. Not a merging that erases identity, but an alignment that honors it. And even outside of romantic relationships, this evolution is reshaping human connection in beautiful ways. Friendships are becoming more intentional. People are valuing emotional safety, mutual support, and genuine presence more than ever before. Conversations are becoming deeper, more vulnerable, more real. Instead of only sharing achievements and appearances, people are sharing struggles, lessons, and healing journeys. There is less pretending, more authenticity. And this authenticity is healing something collective, a long-standing loneliness that existed even when people were surrounded by others. Because loneliness was never just about physical isolation, it was about emotional disconnection. It was about not feeling seen, understood, or accepted for who you truly are. Self-love and spiritual love dissolve that loneliness from the inside out. When you accept yourself fully, you no longer fear being truly seen. And when you no longer fear being seen, connection becomes natural rather than forced. Another reason this movement feels so profound is because it reconnects people with meaning. In a world that often prioritizes speed, productivity, and external success, many felt empty even after achieving everything they thought they wanted. They reached milestones but still felt disconnected. They gained recognition but still felt unseen. They experienced pleasure but still felt restless. And slowly they began asking deeper questions. What is fulfillment beyond achievement? What is purpose beyond survival? What is love beyond attachment? These questions lead inward, and inward is where spiritual awareness begins. When people reconnect with their inner life, their thoughts, emotions, intuition, and sense of presence, they begin to experience existence differently. Ordinary moments become meaningful. Silence becomes comforting rather than uncomfortable. Gratitude becomes natural rather than forced. They start noticing beauty in simple things, sunlight through a window, a quiet breath, the feeling of being alive in this exact moment. This is spiritual love in action, a reverence for existence itself. And when someone lives from this space, Valentine's Day transforms from a cultural event into a symbolic reminder. A reminder to pause, to feel, to appreciate, to reconnect, not just with another person, but with life itself. Some celebrate by meditating and sending love to the world. Some write forgiveness letters they never send. Some spend time nurturing their body with care and respect. Some express gratitude to friends who became family. Some simply sit in stillness and acknowledge their own journey, everything they survived, everything they learned, everything they became. These quiet rituals may not look deeply powerful, because intention gives meaning to action, and meaning gives depth to love. What is also fascinating is how this shift is influencing future generations. Younger people are growing up watching adults talk openly about mental health, emotional awareness, and inner healing. They are learning that vulnerability is not weakness, that self-respect is not selfishness, and that love is not something you must suffer to deserve. This cultural change is planting seeds that will shape relationships for decades to come. Imagine a world where people enter relationships already feeling whole, where connection is based on shared growth rather than mutual emptiness, where love is chosen freely, not clung to desperately. That is the direction this movement is pointing toward. Of course, this transformation is not always easy. Choosing self-love can feel unfamiliar, especially if you were taught to prioritize everyone else first. Spiritual growth can feel disorienting when old beliefs begin to dissolve. Healing can feel painful when suppressed emotions finally surface. But every stage of this journey carries a quiet reward: greater peace, deeper clarity, stronger authenticity. And eventually, something extraordinary happens. You stop searching for love as if it is separate from you, and you start experiencing yourself as a source of love. Your presence becomes calmer, your reactions become more conscious, your relationships become more balanced. And your life begins to feel less like something happening to you and more like something flowing through you. This is the essence of the self-love and spiritual love movement. It is not about rejecting romance, but about elevating love to its most conscious form. It is not about isolation, but about connection that begins within. It is not about perfection, but about presence. And as this awareness continues to spread, Valentine's Day becomes less about proving love and more about practicing it in thoughts, in actions, in energy, in intention. Because the deepest truth many are now discovering is simple yet profound. Love is not something you find when the conditions are right. Love is what remains when you become fully present with yourself, with others, and with the sacred experience of being alive. And that realization is changing everything. And yet, perhaps the most profound part of this transformation is how quietly it changes a person's inner world before it ever becomes visible on the outside. Self-love and spiritual love are not loud revolutions. They do not always announce themselves with dramatic life changes or grand declarations. Instead, they begin in subtle shifts almost invisible at first. A moment where you pause before criticizing yourself. A decision to rest instead of pushing through exhaustion. The courage to say no without explaining your worth. The willingness to sit with an uncomfortable emotion instead of distracting yourself from it. These small choices may seem ordinary, but they are sacred turning points. Because every time you choose awareness over autopilot, compassion over judgment, presence over avoidance, you are rewriting the relationship you have with yourself. And slowly, gently, the way you experience love begins to expand beyond anything you previously understood. You begin noticing that love is not only something you feel when life is going well, it is also something that holds you when life feels uncertain. It is the quiet reassurance that you are still worthy even when you make mistakes. It is the patience you offer yourself while learning something new. It is the softness in your inner voice when you are struggling. This is a form of love many people were never taught to practice. Yet once discovered, it becomes the most stabilizing force in their lives. Because external circumstances will always change, people will come and go, situations will rise and fall, but the way you hold yourself through those experiences determines whether you feel safe in your own existence. And spiritual love deepens this sense of safety even further by expanding your identity beyond temporary experiences. It reminds you that you are not only your achievements, your roles, your past, or your fears. You are awareness itself, the observer of your thoughts, the witness of your emotions, the presence that remains even as everything else shifts. When people begin experiencing themselves from this deeper awareness, their attachment to external validation starts to loosen naturally. They still appreciate connection, appreciation, and affection, but they are no longer dependent on it for their sense of worth. And this changes the entire emotional landscape of their lives. They no longer chase love from a place of emptiness. They share love from a place of fullness. This shift from seeking to sharing is one of the most defining features of the self-love and spiritual love movement. It transforms how people give, receive, and recognize love in everyday moments. For example, acts of care that once felt like obligations begin to feel like conscious expressions of energy. Listening to someone deeply becomes an offering of presence. Speaking honestly becomes an act of respect. Even simple kindness towards strangers becomes a reflection of inner abundance rather than social expectation. Love becomes less about dramatic expressions and more about consistent alignment between intention and action. And something beautiful happens when many individuals begin living this way at the same time. The emotional atmosphere of communities begins to change. There is more empathy, more patience, more willingness to understand different perspectives. People become less reactive and more reflective. They pause before responding. They seek clarity instead of assuming harm. They value emotional responsibility instead of blame. These may seem like small cultural shifts, but collectively, they reshape how humans coexist. Spiritual love naturally encourages unity because it reveals the interconnectedness of all experiences. When you recognize your own pain deeply, you become more sensitive to the pain of others. When you experience your own healing, you feel genuine compassion for those still struggling. When you feel your own inner peace, you naturally want to protect and share that peace in your environment. This is why many people on a spiritual path feel drawn towards service, not as sacrifice, but as expression. Helping others, offering support, creating safe spaces, sharing wisdom, these actions feel like natural extensions of inner love rather than duties imposed from outside. And this dimension of love goes far beyond personal relationships. It influences how people relate to society, to nature, and even to time itself. Many who embrace spiritual love begin to live more intentionally. They consume more consciously. They speak more thoughtfully. They become aware of how their choices affect not only themselves but the wider world. Love becomes an ethical force guiding decisions, not just an emotional experience. Even the pace of life begins to feel different. Instead of rushing constantly toward the next milestone, people begin valuing depth over speed. They savor moments instead of merely passing through them. They allow experiences to unfold instead of trying to control outcomes. This slower, more mindful way of living is not laziness, it is presence. And presence is where spiritual love is most fully experienced. Because love cannot be felt deeply when attention is scattered, it can only be experienced when awareness is here now, fully engaged with life as it is. This is why practices like meditation, reflection, prayer, and mindful breathing have become so central to modern self-love culture. They are not trends for aesthetic appeal, they are tools for returning to presence. And presence is where the illusion of separation dissolves. In presence, you realize that love is not something happening between separate entities, it is the energy flowing through all existence. This realization can feel subtle, or it can feel overwhelming depending on how deeply one experiences it. Some describe it as peace, others as connection, others as divine presence. But regardless of language, the essence remains the same, a sense that life itself is infused with meaning, and that every being is part of a shared unfolding. When someone lives with this awareness, even ordinary relationships feel sacred. A conversation becomes an exchange of consciousness. A shared silence becomes communion. A moment of understanding becomes grace. And this perspective dissolves much of the fear that once surrounded love. Fear of rejection, fear of loss, fear of vulnerability. Because spiritual love teaches that connection is never truly lost, it simply changes form. Experiences end, but growth remains. Relationships evolve, but the love experienced within them becomes part of who you are. Nothing meaningful is wasted. Everything becomes part of your expansion. This understanding brings a kind of emotional freedom many people had never known before. They can love deeply without clinging. They can appreciate fully without fearing endings. They can give openly without calculating return. This is not detachment in a cold sense, it is openness without fear. And this fearless openness is transforming how people approach Valentine's Day itself. Instead of measuring love by external symbols, many are measuring it by inner alignment. Instead of asking, "What did I receive?" they ask, "How present was I? How authentic was I? How deeply did I honor love in all its forms?" Some spend the day reconnecting with parts of themselves they ignored for years. Some reach out to express gratitude to people who shaped their lives. Some release relationships that no longer reflect their growth. Some commit to new beginnings grounded in self-respect and spiritual awareness. In this way, Valentine's Day becomes less about celebration in the traditional sense and more about conscious reflection, a yearly moment to realign with love's highest expression within and around you. And perhaps the most extraordinary realization emerging from this entire movement is this: love is not something fragile that must be protected from life's difficulties. Love is the very force that allows you to move through those difficulties with strength, resilience, and meaning. It is not weakened by challenges, it is revealed through them. Every time someone chooses healing instead of bitterness, understanding instead of judgment, growth instead of stagnation, they are proving that love is not merely a feeling. It is a power, a creative, transformative, sustaining power that reshapes identity, relationships, and even collective consciousness. This is why self-love and spiritual love are not temporary cultural trends. They are evolutionary movements in human awareness. They reflect humanity learning, slowly but steadily, that the deepest of does not come from possessing love, but from embodying it. And as more people embody love, patiently, imperfectly, authentically, the meaning of connection itself continues to evolve. Valentine's Day simply reflects this evolution, but the real celebration is happening quietly every day, in every heart that chooses awareness, compassion, and presence over fear. That is where love is truly being reborn.